Working a gas station night shift is one of those jobs that sounds boring until it isn't. Most nights you're just counting ceiling tiles and waiting for sunrise. But every now and then, something happens that changes how you feel about being alone at 3 a.m. These are 3 of those nights. I worked the overnight shift at a BP station just off a 2-lane state highway in rural Ohio. The nearest town was about 6 miles east, and the nearest house was probably 1.5 miles in either direction. On a slow night, you could go 2 hours without a single car pulling in. The only sounds were the hum of the refrigeration units, the occasional 18-wheeler rumbling past on the highway, and whatever I had playing low on the radio behind the counter. I'd been working that shift for almost a year, and I've gotten used to the quiet. Most nights I welcomed it. The night this happened was a Wednesday in late February. Cold enough that the parking lot was empty by 11 p.m. and stayed that way until almost 1 a.m. I was behind the counter reorganizing the tobacco display when a white panel van pulled in slowly. No trailer, no signage, no company logo of any kind, and parked in the far corner of the lot instead of pulling up to a pump. It sat there with the engine running for about 5 minutes. Then the lights went off. Engine still running, just the lights off. I kept watching it on the monitor. Nobody got out. I told myself it was a trucker catching a quick rest, even though the van was too small for that to make much sense. I went back to stacking cigarette cartons. When I looked at the monitor again, the van still hadn't moved. Around the 7 or 8 minute mark, the driver's door opened and a man climbed out. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket, and he walked toward the store with his hands in his pockets and his head slightly down. Nothing unusual about how he was built or how he moved. He came in, gave me a single nod, and walked the aisles at a slow, unhurried pace. He spent probably 3 minutes just walking the store, before picking up a bag of chips and a Gatorade and bringing them to the counter. While I was scanning his items, he asked me what time I got off. I told him 6 a.m. I don't know why I answered honestly. It just came out before I thought about it. He nodded and said, "Long night?" Picked up his change, tucked it in his jacket pocket, and walked out without another word. I watched him on the monitor. He went back to the van, but he didn't leave. He sat there for another 10 minutes with the engine still running. I could see the exhaust rising in the cold air on the exterior camera. Just sitting there, engine on, facing the store. Then he pulled forward, not toward the exit, but toward the side of the building. He parked along the wall, just outside the reach of the lot lights. I had one camera on the side of the building, a fixed angle that covered the air pump and the dumpster enclosure. He was parked just past that camera's frame, out of sight. I couldn't see him anymore. I didn't know if he was still in the van or not. I called the non-emergency line and told them what was going on. The dispatcher said she'd send someone to do a drive-by pass. I stayed near the phone and kept my eyes on every camera I had. About 4 minutes later, I heard the van pull back around to the front of the lot. He sat there for another minute, fully visible on the front camera again, and then pulled out onto the highway heading west without stopping. The patrol car came about 20 minutes later. The officer walked the full perimeter with a flashlight, checked along the side of the building, and came in to take down what I'd seen. He didn't find anything left behind. He told me I'd done the right thing calling. I thought about that a lot afterward. The way the man had asked what time I got off, like it was just small talk. The exact change. The way he'd moved the van to park just outside the camera's frame, like you'd taken a moment to figure out exactly where that frame ended. I finished that shift with every interior light on and the phone sitting on the counter in front of me the entire night. When my replacement came in at 6 a.m., I didn't tell her what had happened. I didn't want to scare her. I've never been sure that was the right decision. This was about 8 months into working nights at a Citgo attached to a small highway convenience store. We had 6 pumps out front and 1 wide-angle security camera covering the lot from a mount above the front entrance. The image was grainy but wide enough that you could make out faces if someone stood within 20 feet of the building. It was a Friday night in July, hot enough that the asphalt had been soft earlier in the day, and the air still hadn't cooled off properly by midnight. By 2 a.m., the lot was completely empty, and I was eating a sandwich behind the counter, half watching the monitor out of habit. That's when I noticed the woman at Pump 3. She was standing beside a silver sedan, holding the pump handle. But the pump hadn't started. No numbers running on the display. She was just standing there, completely still, looking directly at the front of the store. Not at her phone, not at the pump screen, at the store. I figured she was waiting for a card to process, so I let it go. But a full minute passed, and she still hadn't moved. I checked the inside pump display panel. Her pump hadn't been activated at all. No card had been run. She was just standing there, gripping the handle and staring at the building. I picked up the intercom to ask if she needed help. When my voice came through the outside speaker, she didn't react the way most people do. No startled look, no wave, no, "I'm fine." She turned her head slowly toward the camera above the entrance, found the lens, and held eye contact with it. Not a glance, a long, deliberate stare directly into the camera. Then she set the pump handle back in its cradle and walked calmly to the passenger side of her car. She opened the door, leaned inside, and stayed bent into the car for almost 2 full minutes. I couldn't make out what she was doing. When she stood back up, she was holding something at her side, but the camera angle and distance made it impossible to identify. She walked back around to the pump, set whatever she was holding on the roof of the car, ran her card, and started fueling like nothing had happened. Normal. Like the previous 5 minutes hadn't occurred. She came inside while her tank was filling, bought a single bottle of water. She was composed, made eye contact when she handed me the cash, said thank you when I gave her change. Pleasant, even. I remember thinking she seemed like someone who was very practiced at seeming calm. Right before she walked out, she stopped at the door and turned back around. She said, "Your back door is unlocked, just so you know." I didn't respond. She walked out, got in her car, and left. I went immediately to the back of the store. The door was locked. I checked it twice, then checked the stock room and the employee bathroom. Everything was exactly as it should have been. Nothing disturbed, nothing moved. I never figured out what she'd taken out of her car, or what she'd set on the roof while she pumped her gas. When I left that morning, I drove past Pump 3 on my way out of the lot. There was nothing on the pump canopy above it. Whatever it was, she'd taken it with her when she left. But for weeks after that, the first thing I did every single shift was walk to the back door and check the lock. Even though it was always secured, even though nothing ever came of it. Some things just rewire something in you, and you can't explain exactly what it is you're afraid of. You just know that you are. I was working at a speedway on the edge of a mid-sized city. Not a bad area, not a great one. The kind of neighborhood where you learned pretty quickly to pay attention to small things. I was the only employee on from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and we had a solid camera system, 4 exterior angles, one on the register, one covering the back half of the store, including the cooler wall and the stockroom door. The man first came in at 12:40 a.m. Baseball cap pulled low, dark jeans, a jacket despite it being a warm night. He bought a single lighter, paid cash, and left without much conversation. Nothing about him stood out. I forgot about him almost immediately. He came back at 1:55 a.m. He walked straight to the coolers at the back, stood there with the door open for a while, then came to the counter with a water bottle. While I was ringing him up, he asked if we had a payphone outside. I told him we hadn't had one in years. He nodded, looked around the store in a slow, unhurried way. Not like he was browsing, more like he was taking stock of the layout, and left. After he walked out, I pulled up the back camera footage. I wanted to see exactly how long he'd been standing at the coolers. On the recording, he hadn't been looking at the drinks at all. He'd been facing slightly left, toward the stockroom door. Just standing there, studying it for almost 4 straight minutes. The third time he came in was 3:20 a.m. He didn't go to the coolers this time. He walked directly to the counter and asked if he could use the restroom. I told him it was employees only. He smiled and said he'd seen other customers use it before. I told him I couldn't allow it. He held eye contact for a beat too long, said, "No problem," and turned toward the door. Then he stopped at the motor oil display near the exit and stood there like he was reading the labels. For almost 5 minutes. Not picking anything up, not checking his phone, not doing anything a normal customer does. Just standing at the edge of the store where he had a clear sight line to the front windows, the counter, and the back of the store at the same time. I called my manager. Rang out. Called again. Voicemail. I kept him in my peripheral vision. Eventually, he grabbed a random bottle of oil without really looking at it, brought it to the counter, paid cash, and walked out. I watched the exterior camera. He walked past the lot entirely and got into a car parked on the street just beyond the property line, not in the lot, on the street, and sat there with the engine off. That car did not move for over 30 minutes. I called the non-emergency line. A patrol car came, but by the time it turned into the lot, the car on the street was already gone. The officer came inside. I showed him the back camera footage of the man studying the stockroom door, and he took my statement. He told me to keep all employee area doors locked and to call immediately if the man returned. He did return. About a week later, different shirt, same jacket. He came in, bought a pack of gum without making extended eye contact, and left in under 2 minutes. He didn't look at the stockroom door. He didn't ask about the restroom or a payphone. He behaved like a completely ordinary customer. That bothered me more than any of the other visits combined. Because whatever he'd been building toward the first 3 times, whatever he'd been mapping out in his head, he'd either decided against it, or he'd decided he already had everything he needed. And standing there behind that counter, watching him walk out, I genuinely didn't know which one of those was supposed to make me feel better.